Whew, well, the Mets sure know how to make things interesting, huh? Welcome back, guys, to Mets Central. This is Mets Fan Reaction Game 82. The New York Mets defeat the Washington Nationals by a score of 9-7 as they take the first game of this four-game series against the Nats. And before we get into this game review, I just want to say one thing. David Stearns, if you're listening to this post-game, if you're bored tonight and you decide to pop on this post-game, just hear me out for a second. Can you please get some new bullpen arms in here? Because if the New York Mets want to make a serious run at a postseason spot, guys like MARTINEZ and Tyler J cannot be in this bullpen. Because not only can they not get guys out, but they can't even throw strikes consistently. And listen, I know it's tough right now because obviously Diaz serving the suspension right now. He's got 5 more games. Rayleigh's out for the year. Drew Smith is most likely out for the year, but the Mets got to find new bullpen arms. So, David, please do your magic. Go find some new bullpen arms and turn them into great relievers because, yeah, I can't watch these two guys anymore because it's just going to drive me insane. But anyway, let's get into this game review. We had David Peterson on the mound for the Mets and Mackenzie Gore on the mound for the Nationals. Yeah, anywhere to start the game, top of the first, we would have Francisco Lindor with a single to lead off the game. Harrison Bader would then ground out into a double play. JD Martinez would walk. And then Pete Alonso would strike out. So nothing over for the Mets on top of the first. Bottom of the first, like I said, David Peterson on the mound. You'd have CJ Abrams to single to right field. Lane Thomas would then would hit a force out to Francisco Lindor. It was a hard force out. Lindor couldn't catch the ball, but he was able to knock it down. And thankfully, he was able to get CJ Abrams out second, Lane Thomas to first. Then you had Harold Ramirez fly out to Tyrone Taylor in right. And then Joey Meneses would ground out to Pete at first base to end the inning. Moving on to the top of second, Vientos would strike out. Tyrone Taylor would then ground out to C.J. Abrams. And Francisco Lindor would fly out to Lane Thomas. So nothing going for the Mets in the top of the second. Moving on to the bottom of the second, Vargas would ground out to Mark Vientos at third. James Wood then in his first at-bat in his MLB career, he will get a hit because, of course, these guys got to get their first hit off against the Mets. Then Kyber Ruiz will get a single, so first and second with 1 out. But then David Peterson would make the big pitch, and Nick Senzel would ground out into a double play to end the second inning. Then we move on to the top of the third. Jose Iglesias will pop out to second base. Jeff McNeil would strike out. Of course he does. And then Francisco Lindor would then strike out on a foul tip. So, again, nothing going for the Mets in the third. Then we move on to the bottom of the third. Jacob Young will fly out to Tyrone Taylor in right. C.J. Abrams will then walk. Lane Thomas with the single to right field. Harold Ramirez would then single again as he would bring in he would bring in Lane Thomas. Then Joey Meneses would single again, and he would bring in Harold Ramirez. So the Nats would go up 2-0 here in the fourth. Thankfully, no more damage was done as David Peterson was able to, again, to get the big pitch, and he would get Vargas to ground into a double play. Then moving on to the top of the fourth, you had Bader fly out sharply to center field. JD Martinez would then strike out. Pete would then get a 2-out single. Vientos would then double. So we would have second and third with Pete at third and Vientos at second. Unfortunately, the Mets couldn't able to cash in a run as Tyrone Taylor would strike out. Bottom of the fourth, David Peterson was able to get James Wood to strike out. He'd get Kyber Ruiz to ground out, and then he'd get Nick Senzel to ground out to Pete Alonso. So a pretty easy fourth inning after a difficult third inning for David Peterson. Then top of the fifth, Alvarez would lead off. He would strike out. Iglesias would ground out to C.J. Abrams at second base. McNeil actually would get a hit. He would get a hit past Nick Senzel at third. Unfortunately, the Mets couldn't get anything going there as Francisco Lindor would fly out to right field and Lane Thomas would make the catch. So a pretty easy 1 through 5 innings 1 through 5 for Mackenzie Gore as the Mets really didn't test him apart from that fourth inning where they had second and third. Moving on to the bottom of the fifth, Jacob Young would then line out to Jose Iglesias at second. C.J. Abrams would strike out, and Lane Thomas would ground out to Francisco Lindor at short. So David Peterson had a pretty decent game so far. I mean, apart from that fourth inning, he did get into some trouble a couple times, but when he had to make the big pitch, he did get some big double plays. Then moving on to the top of the sixth, this is where the Mets finally started to get some offense. Harrison Bader would lead up the inning with a single up to right field. Then JD Martinez would strike out. Harrison Bader would then steal second. Pete Alonso would then fly out. Then the Nationals would make a pitching change as Davey Martinez switched out Mackenzie Gore and brought in Derek Law from the bullpen. Mark Vientos continues his clutch hitting as he'd get a single and he'd bring in Harrison Bader to score. So Mets cut the lead down to 2-1. Then Tyrone Taylor would reach on a single as he would hit the ball hard to CJ Abrams, and it would just go under his glove. Then Francisco Alvarez, the guy who needs an extension. Please, David Stearns, get an extension done with Alvy immediately. He would double down the left field line as he'd bring in Mark Vientos and Tyrone Taylor. So 3-2 Mets. And then Iglesias came up, couldn't get Alvarez across, and he would ground out to Joey Meneses. Bottom of the sixth, Harold Ramirez would fly out to Tyrone Taylor. Joey Meneses flew out to center field. Harrison Bader caught the ball, and Vargas would ground out to David Peterson. So a pretty easy sixth inning there for David Peterson. He was rolling along in this game so far. Then we move on to the top of the seventh. Nats make another pitching change as Robert Garcia comes in for Derek Law. Jeff McNeil would strike out. Francisco Lindor would strike out. Harrison Bader would get a single. So 2-out single for him. Could the Mets get anything going? Unfortunately, they couldn't, as the Nationals would make another pitching change. Dylan Floro would come in for Robert Garcia. Bader would steal second. Martinez would walk, so first and second. Unfortunately, Pete Alonso would ground out to CJ Abrams, and the Mets could not get a run there. Bottom of the seventh, and James Woods would ground out to second base. Cabra Ruiz would single. Daniel Nunez then came in to replace David Peterson. Then Luis Garcia would ground out, and Jacob Young would strike out. So Nunez was able to shut the door there, and Nats wouldn't get anything. Then we move on to the top of the eighth. Mark Vientos strikeout, Tyrone Taylor line out, and Alvy with the strikeout. So nothing going there for the Mets in the top of the eighth. Bottom of the eighth, the Mets made some defensive substitutions. CJ Abrams, Daniel Del Nunez was still in the pitch. CJ Abrams would line out to Harrison Bader. Lane Thomas would then ground out to Francisco Lindor. Jesse Winker would then walk. And then a really bad error made by Tyrone Taylor and right, similar to Trent Grisham's error that when he was on the Brewers in 2019 against the wild card against the Nationals, where Joey Meneses would just hit the ball into right field and it would just get past Tyrone Taylor and right, and Jesse Winker would come out to score. Thankfully, no more damage was done as Vargas tried to make a bunt, and he was thrown out at first. Then top of the ninth, Jose Iglesias would ground out. McNeil would sharply fly out to center field, and Lindor would strike out. Then bottom of the ninth, interesting as Jake Diekman, everyone's favorite bullpen option, comes in. And of course, he had to make it interesting because why wouldn't he? But James Wood would come up, and it was a pretty simple roller to Jake Diekman, and he couldn't make the throw over to first. So James Wood would get on base once again. Cabra Ruiz would then ground out. Luis Garcia would ground out. So, and I forgot to mention, but James Wood on those plays would move over to third. And then Jacob Young would come out, and he hit a ball to right field. And thankfully, Tyrone Taylor made up for that huge mistake as he made a big catch as it almost went over his head, but thankfully he was able to make the catch. Then top of the 10th, Mets offense comes to life once again. As you would have Francisco Lindor start as the ghost runner. Harrison Bader would get hit by a pitch, so first and second. Then JD Martinez with a big homer. He'd put the Mets up 6-3. Pete Alonso would then fly out. Ben Gamble would then ground out. But Tyrone Taylor would hit a double. Francisco Alvarez once again coming up clutch. He'd triple as he'd bring in Tyrone Taylor to score. That would make it 7-3. Nats make a pitching change, and then Jose Iglesias, Mr. OMG, the guy who cannot get DFA'd anymore. He hit a big 2-run home run to put the Mets up 9-3, and Jeff McNeil would ground out to end the inning. So it would be 9-3 Mets at the top of the 10th, and you would think, right, they would just, it would be a 1-2-3 inning. Mets would make it easy on themselves, but in typical Mets fashion, they don't. Then, as we spoke of before, Tyler J comes in to start the bottom of the 10th, and Jacob Young would be the ghost runner for the Nationals. He'd walk CJ Abrams. He'd get Lane Thomas to strike out. Then Jesse Winker will hit a double down the line. He would make it 9-4 Mets. Joey Meneses would then strike out, and then Vargas would then hit a double, and he'd bring in 2 runs to score, making it 9-6 Mets. And then Mendy tried to, make Tyler J, throw to one more batter. Unfortunately, he'd walk James Woods, so Reed Garrett had to come in. And thankfully, well, not thankfully because I got ahead of myself there, but Kyber Ruiz would hit a single off Reed Garrett as he'd bring in 1 run. So 9-7 Mets. And at this point, you're thinking, oh, no, the Mets are going to blow it again. But thankfully they don't, as Reed Garrett would get Luis Garcia to strike out. So like I mentioned before, the Mets win 9-7. And, yeah, pretty much what I said at the top, David Stern's got to get some new bullpen arms in here because this stuff of Tyler J and Nesta going out there to eat innings, it's not going to work. And the bullpen needs serious reinforcements. Obviously, Diaz is going to come back in 5 more games after he serves a suspension, but even just Diaz, they need more. They need more help in the bullpen. So, yeah, the Mets win this game. They bring their record to 41-41. They are now, let's see, they are now a game and a half out of a final wildcard spot. So, yeah, good one for the Mets. They play tomorrow against the Nationals at 6:45. Sean Manaea is on the mound, and Hertz is on the mound for the Nationals. So, anyway, guys, thanks for watching this game review. Make sure you click like and subscribe. More game reviews, and hopefully the Mets just keep on winning games. See you guys later.